Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
So you guys obviously must know a whole cast of characters of artists out there in LA and in the broader art world. Um, and everyone, gets a little wild and crazy, and with all the shit that's going on, like, so my question kind of is how do you feel about the separation of admiration of art from the artist? Is it something where you hear the story about the musicians or the artists, and then or the filmmakers, and then it tinges the experience of that art, or do you get a real separation? Like, I appreciate the art. I don't give a shit what they say when they're drunk at the bar.
Well, you mean like, can someone be a villain in one story and a hero in another?
Yeah, I suppose, or mostly, like I said, every once in a while I'll hear stories about
Like the Michael
musicians.
Jackson thing.
Yeah, maybe. I never cared about Michael Jackson, so that doesn't
I
hit
didn't
me
either,
personally. But yeah, exactly. Like, uh,
Or any number of things where somebody is, like you've liked their TV shows or their movies or things they've created, and all of a sudden you find out they're a piece of shit.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. Now, is that now? How does that work as artists? Like, knowing
You
a
can
lot of
still
people.
like the work. I think the work and the person who makes it. You don't have to like someone to appreciate what they've done. So someone can be a hero in one version of themselves and a monster in another.
Hmm.
I think that's possible. Like even in my paintings, and I don't know, maybe Chet thinks this agrees with this too. Is like I don't really make someone out to be a hero or a villain. They might look like one or the other, but it's always up for the person to decide. Like,
Yeah.
is this person bad or good? I can't tell, and I think that we all have that monster inside of us somewhere, and if we don't, we're just lying to ourselves. If we think that we're not a monster somewhere, if we couldn't be the if we couldn't be the Hitler, every one of us has that capacity within us.
Mm.
I don't think people are necessarily inherently good or evil. I think those are things that are probably developed through the pressures of their environment, like how they were raised, what the experiences they had, all these things. They lead into a direction of not to say that people aren't completely responsible, but things happen to people that help form who they are.
Sure.
And you can't be responsible for everything that happens to you. The question is, are we responsible for everything that we do? And then you can get into the questions of, do we have free will and all those sort of things. And
Yeah. Yes.
I
Here we
lean
go.
I lean on the side of that. I don't think we do have free will,
Uh-huh.
but to have that, you have to kind of accept that the terming things in the sense of good and evil is just a way of thinking about things, that maybe good and evil don't exist. I mean, we obviously have an experience and we know what we mean when we say evil, but when you try to pin anything like that down, it gets ambiguous and confusing, down to the point where, is Michael Jackson evil? Well, I don't. Maybe to some people, and maybe for some parts of his life he was, but that
It's
doesn't mean that his music isn't good or isn't influential or didn't have an impact
right.
in our culture. So
It's weird though because that you know it's kind of a conundrum in a way because to say that a child molester did all these horrible things to kids isn't bad or evil is it's there's not I don't think there's a clear cut answer like sympathizing with Hitler or a serial or a rapist or a child molester it's like on one hand because I agree with you kind of it's like evil good and evil are man-made concepts ultimately and but at the same time we are human beings so there is some kind of moral baseline that most people kind of believe and it's just like it's not an easy cut and dried answer I don't think you know what I mean like just because to say okay Michael Jackson he was just product of his environment and blah blah he's not evil he's evil's a man-made thing but he raped kids over raped children fucked their whole lives up all kinds of kids ruined their lives pretty much people are like suffering now because of it so it's almost like disregarding the suffering of the kids to go, oh, he was just a product of this, and he didn't, you can't really judge. I'm just saying there's no clear cut answer. Is all. It's like wiggly.
Well, we're trying to balance that scale between is the art that was produced more significant than the harm that was created.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
it's like that with Woody Allen too. It's like I love Woody Allen movies and I love Roman Polanski movies, and I'm able to make the separation. I think it's like a personal thing, really. I think it's a personal thing. Everybody kind of has to make that separation. On the other hand, there's a painter that I knew that turned out to be a total scumbag asshole guy in this scene, and I can't really get into his work anymore because of it. So I think it kind of, but it was like I was more personally involved. So
that's like, do you help the starving child who's begging on the street and not help the person who's in Ethiopia on a TV commercial? It's like it's proximity to your experience really depends on what you're going to do to help someone. So it's
just it brings me back to the point I always say: there's no answer. There's no answer for any of it.
that's just an easy out.
Oh, it's just like there's no, the sooner I think we admit that there's no clear-cut answer for anything, the easier it will be to actually come up with solutions for some of the problems.
We're always trying to define what our morality as an individual or culture is, and you might think of our morality as a way of thinking that allows us to go away from suffering and go towards something better. So it may not be some sort of absolute truth, but it might be something that's there's a lot of intellectual philosophers that talk about this lately, like if you guys are familiar with Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson and those guys, and so they have some interesting insights. Yeah,
that means that YouTube's going to tag this, and all of a sudden we're just going to get Jordan Peterson for like the next 6 months on YouTube.
We're not going to go into all the things he says, but what they seem to argue is that they argue around the ideas of what morality is and where it comes from and why we have it, and some people like to argue on the side that it must come from some sort of divinity. That leads us towards something good, and others might argue that it's a product of evolution in our experience because it was selected for. And that's why it's still here. And so the ideas that allowed people to survive longer, at least to reproduction age, tend to survive longer. And so, so some of the ideas around morality based on a ideology. An ideology that is too old and unadaptable, like in some Western religions, have a harder time. We have a harder time rounding off and making those fit our current situations. So some other ideologies and philosophies that don't have such a unchangeable story structure that we're allowed to adapt these things and maybe even create new things for things that we have, like. Stories in the Bible aren't going to tell us what to do about looking at our smartphone too much. It just wasn't conceivable. But there, if you want to think about like a simple version of morality, it's like it used to be, impolite to have your hat on inside or in a theater, and now everybody's got a bright screen to turn on to checking their text messages, and they do, and it just happens so fast that the rules that we form around these things haven't caught up with it. And so what we're looking at now is like we didn't used to see it as either you were a hero or either you were like a really important creator, like a musician or an actor or a movie maker, and your sins were brushed under because your credit was so good. Well, now because of our ability to pay attention so closely, we can see the monster in everybody. And so now we have to figure out, well, do we lump them all in one category? Do we give them all the credit, or do we give them all the blame? And maybe we have to figure out how to compartmentalize those things so that we're not, like with Michael Jackson or those guys, they didn't do this on the good things. They didn't do on their own either. They had people they worked with. They had producers. Right. They had friends and family and people that they rose up to great achievements with the help of everyone around them. And they destroyed people in exactly the same way. Yeah, with the help of everybody around them.
Yeah.
So they did both of those things, and so should you throw out one or the other or both? That's I think where we're at in our society, trying to figure that out.
Yeah, it's weird. It's a weird time because everything's changing so fast. Everything is